Okay, guys, we're going to start on page 286 in your textbook looking at the life and times of Franz Liszt. So he lived from 1811, died in 1886. In your book, you will see the quote that he was handsome, magnetic, an incredible showman, irresistible to women, and a pace setter in musical history. And that honestly sums up Liszt quite well. He was a pianist first and foremost. In the 1840s, he was touring around Europe, and he was performing superhuman feats at the piano. People were just amazed at what he could do with this instrument. And he impressed not just the public, but fellow musicians and composers with his playing and compositions. So who was Liszt? Well, he was born in Hungary, the German-speaking side, so I don't think he ever spoke Hungarian. But his dad actually worked for the Esterházy family, and if that name looks familiar, that's good, because the Esterházys were who Haydn worked for, so that line of aristocracy still existed past the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. At age 11, he moved to Vienna in Austria, and he actually met with Schubert and Beethoven, so he met two famous composers there. And in the 20s, he moved to Paris, which was like the big hotspot for the Romantics, people who were working in the Romantic style or artistic trend. There, he wanted to be called the Paganini of piano. That was basically his goal. And if you're questioning what that is, who is Paganini? We briefly mentioned him at the very beginning of this unit, but he was a virtuoso violinist, died in 1840. And he is known for composing some of the most challenging violin repertoire still to this day. There's some other repertoire that is equally challenging, but a lot of people, when they think of a violinist, a virtuoso violinist, they think of Paganini and his material. There is a legend that he sold his soul to the devil so that he could achieve these virtuoso accomplishments. However, that's of course a legend. But still, his legacy was so huge, and he was an amazing violinist. And Liszt, being like wanting to be the Paganini of piano, he would even take some of Paganini's violin music and transcribe it into piano music. So he would take what was flashy on the violin and turn it into something flashy for the piano. And the comparison was quite obvious to a lot of the audience members. They would have understood that. So, looking at how Liszt was a piano master, he composed some of his most challenging works are from the Transcendental Etudes. So again, etude is a piece that is dealing with a study of some sort, studying some kind of technical quality. You're going to listen and watch one of the Transcendental Etudes, and I think you'll understand exactly why it's so difficult. Along with that, he made transcriptions of Paganini's violin pieces, like we already mentioned. Liszt is known to say, "The piano is my very self." He considered it an extension of himself. Again, a lot of musicians may feel that way, but he really was. Piano came easily for him, and so he kind of demonstrates that not only with his writing but his attitude towards piano. We know that he would play his own arrangements of a lot of classical music. One good example is Berlioz's The Symphonie Fantastique, which we will look at in the following chapter. But this is a very famous and well-known piece, and it requires this huge orchestra, so there's all these sounds going on, all these different lines, all these really dense harmonies, and he made a piano arrangement for it. And so he was actually able to create something that seemed even more powerful than the original orchestral work just on the piano. And people are still just going, how? How does that work? But Liszt made it work. I'm looking at elements of his career. So some of this is in yellow, so those are the important parts. He toured Europe between 1839 and 1847 as a solo pianist. So at age 36, he decided that he wanted to quit traveling like full time and became a court conductor in Weimar. So remember, it's very rare to still have court conductor positions. You have to be absolutely amazing to get one of those. Liszt got one of those. So yes, we can assume that he was an amazing composer and musician. We know that he taught hundreds of gifted pianists for free. That's nice. He supported a fellow composer's career, Wagner. We're going to talk about Wagner at the end of this unit, and we'll talk about why these two are connected. But he did support Wagner's career financially, and he started to write some music criticism. So just like Robert Schumann was writing some music criticism with his journal, the New Journal of Music, Liszt was also taking to music criticism, which became a very big trend here in the 1800s. This painting, here is Liszt seated at the piano. This is one of his girlfriends just fawning over him. Everybody else in the room is going, oh my gosh, this guy is amazing. And Liszt, he's kind of ignoring everybody. He's looking at this bust of Beethoven. The message of this portrait really is that composers of the current day, even the mid-1800s, are still looking back at Beethoven as a really important source of inspiration. People are trying to achieve or even overcome Beethoven's legacy, and they feel like they never can. So we still have Beethoven's shadow long into the 1800s. Now, talking about Liszt's love life, we usually don't go into the love life of a composer, but there is a little bit of, unless we have some kind of reason for that. There is a reason. During his lifetime, he dated two different aristocratic writers, different times, but one of his girlfriends was the Countess Marie de Gaulle. I believe she is the one who is sitting at the piano with him in that previous slide. She had left her husband to go date Liszt, and they had 3 children. Why is that important? Because one of their children, Cosima, she eventually married Richard Wagner. Here is that couple. This is Cosima Liszt and Wagner. So that is how Liszt and Wagner are connected. They're literally in-laws. Okay, so definitely remember that his daughter is married to Richard Wagner. Another famous girlfriend of Liszt was the Russian Princess Caroline Wittgenstein. Not really sure how she says that last name, but that's about as close as I can get to it. So he dated some very important people. However, he did not stay a ladies' man. Later on in his life, he took minor religious orders. He went to Rome in 1861, 1865. He became Abbé Liszt. And so a lot of people made this comment that he went from this womanizer to a religious man, and how that's like almost a complete 180, it feels. And so there's just this disconnect in a lot of people going, wait, this is all the same person? Yes, it is. In his final years, he would travel between Rome, Weimar, and Budapest, frequently performing, writing music. He really honestly never slowed down. He became the president of the new Academy of Music, and he wrote experimental pieces that a lot of people thought was weird. They didn't like it as much as his early flashy stuff, but these late piano pieces foreshadow what's going to happen in the 20th century. So he was living in the mid-1800s, but he's already foreshadowing what will happen like 50, 70 years later. And so that's really cool in a way, and just shows you how much of an impact he had on the musical climate. Also, this is totally a side note, he has had the same hairstyle like his entire life. If you go back and look at all these pictures of him, same hairstyle, that same bob cut. I guess it worked for him. Anyway, that was me getting distracted. So looking at some of Liszt's music, some people found it controversial. Some thought it was just bombastic and pretentious and just snooty almost because it was so over the top. And other people were like, man, this stuff is so cool, I want more. And so there's a mixed reception to Liszt. Regardless, he definitely exploits the piano. Again, the piano keeps getting stronger and stronger as better materials are used. And so he definitely takes advantage of that. He does have some nationalist tendencies. He will reference some things from Hungary, and he will reference some things from the Germanic region, the Austrian region, because he lived a good bit of his life in that area. He has some gypsy influence, which was kind of popular during the day, during the Romantic period, the 1800s. Gypsy influence was just one of the trends, more or less. And he would often transcribe symphonic works, and it still sounded super full. It didn't sound like it was lacking anything. And he made them, of course, a little bit more, I guess we could say extra, or more flamboyant, more bombastic, like we have at the first point. But a lot of people were just fascinated by those works. They really enjoyed them. One of the biggest things that Liszt did in his career that impacted a lot of people was develop what is called the symphonic poem. It's also called a tone poem, so you can call it either one of those terms, but it is a single movement orchestral work, and it's going to be programmatic. It's based on literary or pictorial ideas, so it's going to have a story with it, and it's just one movement. Some of Liszt's symphonic poems would be the Faust Symphony, Dante Symphony, and the Mephisto Waltz. All of those are symphonic poems. Okay, and a lot of these symphonic poems, they're putting in a lot of content in a very small amount of time, like maybe 15-minute work, but you kind of include a lot of different moods, contrasting moods sometimes, but they're all unified by a single theme or an idea. Okay, so again, they follow a single storyline. Okay, finally, looking at an example of his piano works. This is the Transcendental Etude number 10 in F minor, written in 1851, so after he stopped touring. This is found on page 289 in your textbook. A lot of people consider this a virtuoso piece. You have to be amazing to be able to play this. There are 3 different editions of this. The last one, which is one you're going to be hearing, is dedicated to his piano teacher, Carl Czerny. And I don't know if any of you ever took piano lessons, but there is a Czerny method book out there that's still very popular today. I had to play exercises from the Czerny method book, so some of you may have as well. But if you've ever wondered, who on earth is Czerny? Why is he important? Well, he taught Liszt, so he definitely knew what he was doing. But you have the link to the Transcendental Etude in your playlist. Oops. Okay, going on to the next chapter. Sorry, my PowerPoint's going crazy right now. I think more. Okay, going on to chapter 9, looking at the life and career of Felix Mendelssohn. Okay, there it goes, sorry. So he lived from 1809, died in 1847, and he is a good mixture of what is romantic and what is classical. He blends these two ideas together. So even though he's not literally a transitional figure, he feels like it in some ways. He was born in Germany, in Hamburg, to a wealthy and distinguished Jewish family. And we're going to talk a little bit about how his heritage actually impacts some of his musical compositions. And his grandfather was a famous Jewish philosopher as well. So his family was known as a prominent Jewish family. However, his mom and dad were actually Protestant. And they changed their family name to Bartholdy, and that was to fit in better with society. One of those strange but true, sad but true facts. As my PowerPoint tries to load, yeah, there we go. Mendelssohn, some of his works you'll see actually has 2 names, Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy, because he claimed all of those names. But he was definitely a virtuoso, a child prodigy. At age 9, he was a pianist. At age 13, he started composing symphonies, concertos, sonatas, vocal works, you name it. And as a teenager, he would get together with a small orchestra, a private orchestra, and play for the elite in Berlin. So we talked about this event back in the Baroque unit, but we're going to talk about it again. So Mendelssohn and Bach are not related by blood or anything, but are connected by this one central event. So at age 20, Mendelssohn conducted Bach's St. Matthew's Passion. This was the first performance of Bach's St. Matthew's Passion in concert since Bach had died. So over 100 years, or roughly 100 years. This brought back Bach's popularity and actually made Bach an internationally recognized composer for the first time ever. it also made Mendelssohn super famous. So kind of two birds, one stone. This one event made both Bach and Mendelssohn internationally known. At this point in his career, even though Mendelssohn's only 20 years old, he was performing as a pianist, organist, conductor in both Germany and England. Both countries really adored some of Mendelssohn's works. So looking at some of his accomplishments here, he played for the Queen Victoria in England, so that's nice. He knew royalty. There's actually a really amusing story with this. Queen Victoria had a collection of Mendelssohn's art songs, and she really liked this one particular song, and she went up to Mendelssohn and said, "Oh my goodness, this is absolutely my favorite art song." And he says, "Well, thank you. I'm so glad you enjoy it. However, I need to let you know that I didn't write that. My sister did." So Felix Mendelssohn had a sister, Fanny, and she was equally as talented as her brother, but she was very hesitant to publish music under her own name or publish music at all. So if she did, she would get her brother to publish it and claim it as his own. So he did that for her. So that was an interesting little story that I thought was cute. He premiered his oratorio Elijah, one of his most famous works, in Birmingham, England in 1846. Great fame and acclaim there. At age 26, he became the conductor of the Leipzig Gewandhaus Orchestra. So that's a major job and accomplishment for him. He's just 26 years old. And at age 33, he founds the Leipzig Conservatory, so a school for musicians. So he is a mover and a shaker. The grass does not grow under his feet. Here is a print of Mendelssohn visiting with Queen Victoria and her husband, Prince Albert. He's looking on quite authoritarian, kind of an authority figure, like, yes, you're doing very well. And then finally, looking at who Mendelssohn was as a person. He was actually kind of a conventional and normal guy, and that's very, I don't want to say strange, but not super common in the Romantic period. A lot of artists want that bohemian vibe, more or less. He was just a regular person. He was happily married, had 4 kids, from all accounts really enjoyed his family life. However, because he was such a workaholic, he was traveling like crazy, he was working like crazy, and he actually died of a stroke at age 38 because of that. So, lesson learned, don't be a workaholic. Okay, so looking at some of his music, because he blends romantic and classical ideas together, a lot of his music kind of feels a bit more classical than other romantic composers. There's a sense of elegance and balance in his music, and that even, if we want to take the autobiographical route, reflects some of his personality as well. He's a well-rounded individual. He was a polyglot, so he was fluent in several languages, and he could hold conversations in 4 different languages, which I'm just like, shoot, I can barely function in one. So, really smart guy. And he was also very good at dealing with the elite. He grew up in a well-to-do family, and so he was comfortable with the aristocracy. In his music, you're going to hear a lot of different moods, but they're not extremes. It's not like overly dramatic. It has drama, but it's not the most dramatic. And he wrote in all forms except for opera. Okay, some of his famous works would be the Violin Concerto. We're going to take a look at a little bit of that in just a second. He also wrote some incidental music for Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. He wrote the Hebrides Overture, which is a programmatic work. He also wrote the Italian symphonies and Scotch symphonies, which could fall into the programmatic category if you want to think of it that way, and his oratorio Elijah. Now this kind of goes back into his Jewish heritage. Elijah, he's a prophet from the Old Testament of the Bible, which would also be part of the sacred writings for the Jewish community. And so it serves 2 purposes. It could be both Jewish and Protestant in that regard. But it definitely hails back to his own heritage. It's also a super amazing work, which I've already discussed. Alright, so his Concerto for Violin and Orchestra. This is found on page, we have a listening guide on page 292. And this was written in 1844. It was inspired by his friend Ferdinand David, pictured here. And he was a famous violinist at the time. And so Mendelssohn wanted to write something to showcase David's prowess. It was immediately a huge success in 1845 at the premiere. You have 3 movements, which is normal for a concerto. However, following the Romantic trends, there are no pauses between the different movements, or if it is, it's just very brief. And Mendelssohn wants to keep the balance between the soloist and the orchestra. And by balance, we're not thinking about, well, we are thinking a little bit about sound balance, but we're also thinking about content balance and form balance between those two categories, those two groups, the soloist and the orchestra. Okay, so you have this video available for you, the movement 1 from the violin concerto, in your playlist. All right, that's it.